Well, howdy, and welcome to this week's episode. This week is brought to you again by Raw World Company. These guys make some incredible coffee, some incredible biltong, and some incredible stockies. So if you guys are into any of those, including the coffee, I freaking have it daily, and I love it. I think it's delicious. If you are a coffee drinker, you like coffee, then you have to try this stuff out. It's freaking delicious, okay? So I'm going to leave it at that. You can go to their website, which is www.rawworldcompany.com.au, and on checkout, use the code, all in capitals, BABH, to get 15% off. Thanks, guys. Hey there, and welcome to Becoming a Bowhunter. I'm your host, Matty, and join me and our guests as we take the quality of meat back into our own hands, searching the wild for free-ranged animals to harvest as ethically as we can. I interview a variety of specialists from the bow hunting community to help fast-track your journey as a bow hunter. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this chinwag on one of your favorite topics in the world, bow hunting. All right, here we are with Michael Herne. Welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So, I mean, dude, we kind of connected on Instagram, and it's cool to get an American on to be able to kind of talk about your experiences as a bow hunter. But I guess, first of all, just for the listeners' sake, like, what is your background in bow hunting? How did you kind of come around to it?
So I grew up in upstate New York and on the East Coast. And I only hunted a handful of times when I was a kid, so I didn't really grow up doing it. I grew up around it. Everybody, real small rural town, so everyone I grew up around hunted, and I was exposed to it, but I never really got into it because I was doing normal high school kid things like chasing girls and playing sports. But after I joined the military and kind of spent some time overseas and kind of just bounce back and forth between hobbies from motorcycles to sports or whatever. I eventually just came back to hunting. It was in 2013, so I got stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, which they have a really good hunting program. So when I got stationed there, I had some friends kind of like, hey, we're gonna all get our hunting licenses and go out and hunt. And they have wild boars there, so you can kind of hunt there all year round too. And from there, it just kind of lit the fire inside and took over.
And so when you were doing that was bow hunting, or was that rifle hunting?
So I started with a rifle and then very quickly got into bow hunting because there was some areas on the base that were bow only, and bow hunting extended our season.
Yeah, cool. And so what is the deal with hogs over there or pigs over there? How does that work? Can you hunt them all year round everywhere, or is it only in certain spaces?
Most of the states that they're a big problem in, you can hunt them all year round. And usually, depending on where you're at, usually day and night too. So
yeah, far out.
Yeah, they're a big time problem. They're trying to keep them under control. But
do you know what sort of numbers you're dealing with?
Georgia, I want to say, is close to like the hundreds of thousands, but don't quote me.
Yeah.
But there's a lot. And again, where I hunted there, like I told you before we started the podcast, on the East Coast, public access is real limited. So I was lucky that Fort Benning had a hunting and fishing program where they allowed the soldiers to hunt and fish on the base.
And so it was just for the soldiers only?
Yeah, the soldiers and their family members, and then retirees or DOD, Department of Defense affiliates.
Yeah.
So I was real lucky there, but they're definitely a big problem. They're a lot of fun to hunt. So
yeah, definitely. So I mean, something we were talking about before the show started was actually about public land access. And I think like from this side of the world, like watching back. But I mean, a lot of the stuff we get to see is or YouTube channels, people who have either private land access or they're just going out and getting, like maybe they live on the West Coast, like you were saying before, it's a lot more access over there. Can you kind of talk about like what the public land access is like? What does it offer you and how you can actually get amongst it?
So, like I said, the eastern United States, pretty much anything east of the Mississippi River is, in some probably 100, 200 miles west of the Mississippi River is a lot of private land because it's all where the first Americans settled, and during all the wars as America was in its infancy, land was promised to people for fighting in the war, so that's kind of how they paid the soldiers. So a lot of privatized land, and then once you start moving out west is where we get into our bigger expanses of public land with our national forests, the Bureau of Land Management. Those are two big federally run organizations that keep land open for the public. And a lot of that stuff started with President Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah.
He went out west and saw this land and was like, we need to preserve it so all Americans can use it, which, I mean, we're real lucky in that aspect.
Yeah, definitely.
That one individual had the foresight to kind of save it for future generations.
Yeah, and do you know, in regards to since then, like even though he said, hey, we should preserve this for future generations, have the presidents since then said like, hey, we need to get rid of this? Like, is that something that you guys have to constantly fight against?
Yeah, I would say yes. I'm not super well versed in the politics of it all, but I know, I mean, so America's made up of 50 states in each state. So, just off the top of my head, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. I mean, those are like the big four Western states.
Yeah.
Each one of those states kind of wants to privatize that land for their own uses. And I won't say each state does, but a lot of times the state government kind of pushes back on the federal government to gain chunks of that public land for their own state uses and to privatize it. So
yeah, far out. And there's something around, like, for instance, I think because if you live within the state, you're a resident, whereas if you're from out of state, you have to apply for a different tag service. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So we have, if you live in the state, you're a resident, and then if you're out of the state, you have to pay. It's usually a non-resident fee, and then depending on the species, it's you do an application to hunt there.
Okay. And for you, for instance, coming from the East Coast over to the West Coast, like how likely is it that you'll get your tags all sorted, like year by year?
Depends on the species. For elk, I know Idaho and Colorado, you can buy over-the-counter tags. So
what's the difference with an over-the-counter compared to the other?
Yeah, I was just about to back up and kind of give you a little background on that. So most of the Western states have game management units. So the state breaks down the land inside its borders into game management units, and I don't know how they broke it up or why they broke it up, but it's broken down into these units. So Colorado, I think, has close to 180 different game management units inside of it. So certain units are managed for trophy quality, and certain units are just over the counter. Anyone can buy a tag, and they can go hunt. So the over the counter unit, you have to apply to hunt in, and it's sometimes, depending on the state, it's a draw or it's a point system. So the more points you have, or the more, you can only buy 1 point a year. So the more points you have, the better your chances are drawing it. And then some states have just a straight up kind of lottery.
Yeah. And do you know, with the point system, like how many years do you usually have to be in it before you're kind of successful with that?
It depends on the unit, and it depends on the unit and how the state manages it. So I mean, in Colorado's the state I can speak the best about because I live there and still go back there every year to hunt. There, depending on some units, it might only take 3 points to draw it, and some units it takes upwards of 15 points to draw.
Yeah, wow.
So there's a few units. I think there's about 3 or 4 units in Colorado that are like once in a lifetime units, because it takes 15 years to draw it.
Yeah,
so
far out. And I mean, just from hearing different podcasts and stuff I listen to, there is certain hunts that it's literally like a once in a lifetime hunt. Like, for instance, some of the sheep hunts, and it's like if you draw the tag and you're not successful, you go back into the draw, and there's potential like you won't ever get drawn again. But if anything, you can't actually be drawn for the next 7 years, for instance. Is that only for sheep, or is that for all animals over there?
It's generally only for sheep, goat, and moose in the lower 48. So in the lower 48 in the continental United States, I mean, they're still working to kind of get the sheep and the goat, mountain goat, and moose numbers back up to a healthy population. So they limit that. I think I just saw something in the news about Montana making it. They're trying to push legislation to make those tags purely once a lifetime. So if you draw it and got it, you're done.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, I mean, going back into, I guess, some stuff that, like, obviously you know a fair bit about it, but you're not a conservationist yourself. So thank you for your insight to it. It's awesome. But in regards to what you've done, what have you hunted and where have you hunted mainly?
So like I said, I picked up my first bow probably 2013, 2014. And started on pigs. So Fort Benning was a great place for me to kind of get out there and make mistakes and learn. I kind of was laughing when you were talking about the first animal you wounded because you never shot your broadheads before. I mean, and it's common. People do it. I did it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it was a gut-wrenching moment, man, to be honest. Like, even when you think back on it, you're like, fuck, man. Like, it's such a simple fix, yet, I don't know.
Yeah.
Bad mistake.
But even with bow hunting, I'm getting a little off track here, but even with bow hunting, that's one of the reasons I love it, because you work so hard to get a shot opportunity, and then if you make a mistake, then all that work you did up to that point, it all just comes crumbling down, and then you're back to square one, figuring out what your mistake was and trying to be better for the next opportunity.
We're kind of all suckers for pain, right? Like, in some way.
Yeah.
Like mental pain, physical pain.
Absolutely.
Like,
yeah. But kind of got off track there. But
that's all right.
So I started at Fort Benning, kind of bow hunting. Started with pigs, and then we have a whitetail deer season there. So I bow hunted whitetail deer, and then from Benning, that's where my love for hunting really grew, is specifically bow hunting.
Yeah.
And started kind of getting ingrained in the social media and seeing what other people were doing. And the first time I ever heard an elk bugle, that lit a whole different kind of fire in my soul. So that just hearing an elk bugle and kind of seeing some YouTube videos about what Western elk hunting with a bow was all about kind of changed the course of my career. I changed my normal duty station where I would have went after Fort Benning, and I chose to get stationed in Colorado, which is a different unit than I was used to serving in. So
yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, but I went out there and I chased elk. So I've got 2 elk under my belt, and I claim a third one because I called it for my buddy, so it kind of counts. I did the hard part. I did the hard part. All he did was loose the arrow. But yeah. So
how long did it take you to get your first elk? How many years were you after it?
So I moved to Colorado to a regular infantry unit. So in the military, I served in the paratroopers, and then decided I wanted to try to kill an elk. So I decided it'd be better to live in Colorado than in North Carolina or on the East Coast where there are no elk. So I moved out to Fort Carson, Colorado, and didn't get to hunt my first year because I was serving overseas. Came home and took 2 weeks off to hunt, and I killed my first bull on probably the last 10 minutes of light on the last day of the 2-week hunt in the mountains.
That's unreal.
Yeah, it was a pretty awesome feeling.
And was it like a very clean kill, or did you have to go searching for a few hours during the night?
So it was a clean kill, but we lost blood after a little while. So we ended up. I was kind of worried because he was kind of facing to me a little bit, so I was kind of worried that I might only got one lung. So we backed out. After we searched for probably about 400 meters before we quit in the mountains, and so we backed out, and I went back in the next morning, and I found him literally 20 meters away from where we stopped searching the night before.
Yeah.
It was definitely a sleepless night.
Yeah, I bet. And in that country, like, do you have the stress or worry of bears, or is it like mountain lions and coyotes do you have to worry about, or where's it at there?
There's out there in the West, well, in Colorado specifically, there's mountain lions and there's black bears, but they're not really a big worry. They can be a nuisance, but I've never really been too freaked out by them. I think I would take a lot of extra precautions if I was around grizzly bears or brown bears, but for black bears and mountain lions, it's not a big thing to worry about or a big factor in a lot of my decision making. About the only thing I do if we're in an area that has a lot of bears and we're completely unsupported or we backpacked in, I'll hang my food in a tree kind of 50 meters to 100 meters away from camp. That's about it.
How about in regards to, like, once you've got an animal down, like, for instance, that night when you had your elk down, is there many stories of, like, I guess carcasses being fed on once you leave it overnight, sort of thing? Like, is that a thing that happens or not really?
It definitely happens. I think it happens more so in grizzly bear territory. I know last elk season, so the 2018-19 season, a guide got killed in Wyoming because
they hear about that.
Yeah, it took them some time to find the carcass. I don't know if they left it overnight or not, but a grizzly had gotten on it, and once they kind of get on a food source, from what I don't have any experience with them, but from what I know and have heard through the grapevine, they tend to become pretty protective of that food source. So,
far out. Yeah, there's an Australian hunter that went over and he got a moose, and I think they left it overnight and went back to it, and a bear had, like, buried the carcass completely. Just, like, pretty rough, some of the stuff that happens.
But I mean, that's generally the only thing you really have to be worried for your life is kind of usually grizzly bears. I mean, if a black bear is kind of holding down a carcass like that, it's got to be really hungry to do that. So it must have had a rough summer.
Yeah.
And then coyotes, coyotes will get after it, but they're afraid of us, and they'll generally run off. They're pretty skittish creatures.
Yeah, okay. And so when you've left an elk overnight, like, is there any worry to the meat because you're not getting to gut it and bleed it straight away? You're not getting to cool the meat down? Like, what happens there? Did you lose anything?
I didn't take the inner loins out of the elk because I was worried. I got both lungs, but I also hit the paunch or the stomach. Yeah. So I was kind of worried about the inner loins, but there's definitely, anytime you have to leave an animal overnight because you couldn't find it, you have that worry of, one, are you going to find it? And two, hopefully you can get to it in time before the meat spoils. But as long as you get to it in time and it's not crazy hot temperatures, you should be fine, which Colorado during the elk season, it gets pretty hot during the day, but cools off enough that I wasn't super worried about the meat spoiling as long as I found it first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's cool. And then for you guys, like, did you say it was just you and a mate that was on this hunt?
Yeah.
How long did it take you guys to, like, butcher the animal and pack it out? Like, how much of a process was that?
It was a process. The first one was definitely a process. I've watched YouTube videos and done all the research I could on it because an elk's a much larger animal than I'd ever killed at that point. You know, most animals that I've killed, you can just drop the guts out of them and drag them out of the woods.
Yeah.
So, but it was probably a solid 2 hours of cutting it up and getting the quarters all apart and getting all the meat we could off the bone or off the carcass, and then packing it out was horrible. I have a saying that every physics is opposite in elk hunting, so what goes down must go back up.
Yeah.
It seems like every time I've had an elk on the ground, we have to walk straight uphill.
It seems like some pretty steep valleys there too. And so how many trips did it take you guys?
We did 2 apiece.
Okay. Yeah.
So front quarter, each of us carried a front and a hind quarter, and then my mate carried the back strap and all the extra neck meat we cut off, basically all the extra meat or trim meat that we got off it, and then I carried a quarter in the head, and antlers up. So
did you ever weigh out the meat to see how much there actually was once it's boned out?
No, we just drove it straight to the processor and had them cut it up for us.
That's cool. So what's the deal there with the processor? Like when you take it to them, what do? They just obviously butcher it for you, but what's the kind of costs involved and what happens with the animal? Like, do they just keep it in a cold room till you're ready to go, or you can kind of leave it there for as long as you need to?
It really depends on the processor and where you go. So here in Kentucky, where I currently live, with white-tailed deer and stuff, going to a processor is it's kind of crazy, all the stuff you can get. I mean, they'll make you summer sausage, snack sticks, jerky. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. Then you get your standard cuts of meat. Out there, the processor I went to in Colorado, they do just real basic, cut it, grind it. They'll add fat to the meat if you want it. One of the big benefits, I think, of going to a processor is they'll hang the meat in a cooler.
Yeah.
They'll hang it and let it dry age for a couple of days or bleed for a couple of days in a cooler, so it won't spoil, but it's still at refrigerator kind of temperatures.
Yeah.
And I think that helps for the flavor on the backside. It's a processing your own animals I've done it a handful of times, and it's a pretty labor intense event. So, I mean, depending on where you're at and what your schedule's like, I mean, if you're doing a bunch of stuff or you're rearranging your schedule so you can get the hunt in, a lot of times it's convenient to be able to just drop it off at a processor and pick it up when it's all done.
Yeah, definitely. I think like going through that, I think it's a good experience to go and do. However, like the hard thing is in Australia, we actually can't drop it at a butcher's. Like that's illegal. It has to go through, like the food industry says that it has to go through an abattoir, so it has to be very sterile before it can go through a butcher's. So unless you've got a butcher mate to come help you, it can be quite a long process.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it, to be honest, but at the same time, I know it's going to be a hefty job. I think I actually had a previous guest, Kev Schilf, and he's a butcher by trade. I think I'll be calling him up when I'm successful over the rut, hopefully. So yeah, I'll just be like, "Oh, Kev, come help me as much as you can, please," or send him videos and be like, "Where have I gone wrong?"
Well, I'll tell you, my big lesson learned from my adventures into processing my own meat are having the right tools is important. Like, I mean, I've tried the first deer I ever tried to process on my own. I did it with a hand grinder.
Yeah.
And that was horrible.
I literally had this conversation on the weekend. Yeah.
Yeah. It was horrible. So if you get a good electric grinder and the bags, like the food saver, or the vacuum sealers, and like a saw that cuts real nice, like it makes a night and day difference versus me trying to do it like a caveman in my garage.
Yeah, I can imagine. So when you're holding your meat, wrapping your meat, you're wrapping it with a vacuum seal bag?
Yeah, and again, it varies from processor to processor. I like vacuum sealed. I think it lasts longer. But I mean, I know the processor I go to that I take my elk to out in Colorado, he just puts it in Ziploc baggies. They're not even Ziploc baggies. They're plastic baggies with no seal on the top.
Yeah.
And then he wraps it real tight and then wraps it again in freezer paper and puts a piece of masking tape on it and done.
Yeah, okay. I think that's have you seen any of the meat eater stuff? Steve Ranella's stuff? I think that's the way he does it pretty much, isn't it? Or is it the opposite? He does the butcher's paper and then the plastic bag. I can't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the two, but yeah, that's they're definitely an interesting system. Like, I mean, most people would think probably just the plastic bag, like a plastic zippy bag, but I mean, vacuum seal is definitely going to get rid of all the air and probably keep the meat better for longer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. I think the vacuum sealer removes the air, probably keeps the meat better for longer, and then with the plastic bag and then the butcher paper, that just adds a extra layer of insulation to keep air from getting to the meat.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me about the process when you go to actually hunt elk, in regards to what's your game plan when you get there? What would you do if it was, or what did you do on your first elk hunt? Like, did you guys call them in? Is that something that you were practicing before you got there? Like, how's that whole process look?
I did a good bit of practicing and a good bit of research on kind of elk calling strategies, whether it be cow calls or bugling. And then when I got there, my first year, I was behind the learning curve, but I was kind of figuring out as I went. So I made a lot of mistakes my first year. I actually ended up running into a hunter. I went up alone at first and didn't have a buddy with me, so he was linking up with me the second week I was out there. So I got there and I actually ended up hunting with a gentleman and his kid.
That's cool.
And so I kind of picked some things up from him and kind of what he was doing. When I was out there, I was real timid. I didn't really want to bugle at him.
Yeah.
I wanted to just kind of cow call because I was afraid I was going to scare him away with a bugle. And then he kind of showed me that, hey, bugling works to find out where they're at.
Yeah.
So bugling, calling, trying to locate them. That's the big thing with elk is finding where they're at. Once you kind of figure out where they're at, then you can make a plan to get on them. But the learning curve my first year was extremely steep. But then my second year, I went back and kind of, after my first year, I took all the lessons learned, and I'll tell you about one of them because you'll get a kick out of it. But I took all the lessons learned and kind of refined everything and went back with a different attitude. And the second year was a night and day difference. I mean, so season opened, I think, August 25th or August 26th. I had my bull on the ground on the 28th, and my buddy had his bull on the ground on the September 1st or 2nd. So
very quick.
Yeah. We called in 5 bulls in 8 days. And it's from everything I've heard, and I only know my experience, my limited experience doing it, is the areas we're hunting are pretty tough hunting for elk. So I feel like we've got something figured out if we're able to do all that in 8 days.
Yeah, definitely.
But that first season was a big time learning experience. And I feel like, as I was listening to your 00 podcast, kind of talking about mistakes you were making, well, now I'm chasing a completely different game animal. So I'd call myself a amateur bow hunter. I've killed quite a few animals with a bow, but never an elk. So I'm hunting a completely different game species in a completely different state and completely different terrain than I'm used to. Because up till then, I mean, other than pigs in the thick woods of Georgia, you're hunting deer out of a tree stand with your bow. So you're not on the ground. You're kind of sitting in a tree and waiting.
Yeah.
So now I'm on the ground and I'm in the mountains and I'm walking around and I'm having to find and call these large animals. So completely out of my element. It was like going back to square one.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
then, trying to calm your nerves. So one of the big lessons I learned while elk hunting that first year was that gentleman and I started calling a bull, and we had a bull working for his kid. A bull came from behind us, and he's like, I'm going to stay here. So we had 2 bulls coming from opposite ends. So he sent me after the other bull, and I ran down the hill. I saw the elk, and my immediate childish thought was to jump behind a tree so he didn't see me. That elk ran to about 5 meters away from that tree and just stared at me through the branches. And I'm standing there. I got my rangefinder in my hand. I have my bow in my hand, and I'm standing there looking at this elk through the trees. Like, if I would have just stayed put and drew my bow, I guarantee I would have put an arrow in that elk. But because I jumped behind the tree, thinking I needed to get behind cover so he didn't see me, I was screwed. So in my mind, I was like, what do I do? So I'm like, screw it. I dropped my rangefinder with this elk staring right at me.
Yeah.
Drop my rangefinder, and I start to move my hand and try to get my release on my D-loop, and the elk took off. And I almost had a 40-yard shot on him, but the cow he was with kind of took him away. So that was hard lesson learned number one.
Yeah.
About a week into just walking 10 miles a day in the mountains.
Far out.
And then the second lesson I learned is that an elk shoulder blade is a lot stronger than a white-tailed deer's. So
okay, so previously you were able to shoot through, and this time you didn't?
I mean, I've made it through a few shoulder blades, especially on whitetails with a heavier arrow setup. But not with a mechanical broadhead and not on an elk. That year, so my first year elk hunting, I just got back from an overseas tour.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of time shooting my bow, so I was kind of, because I knew I didn't have a lot of time to shoot my bow, and I knew I didn't have a lot of time to mess with it and get my fixed blade broadheads to fly proper.
Yeah.
I went out and got the kind of Band-Aid to that and bought a few mechanical broadheads to hunt with, because they fly way closer to your fixed blades. Because I didn't have time. I just figured that was the best option. Yeah. So at least I could get out there and make those mistakes and get the experience. But that same night, I was out there on my own and managed to call in my own bull by myself. And that bull stopped and gave me a perfect 30-yard shot. And I put that mechanical broadhead right in his shoulder blade. Probably only got 3 inches of penetration max. I mean, it sounded like an arrow hitting a tree. And so twice in one day, I was absolutely devastated.
Far out. And so, like, obviously when you hit it in the shoulder, like, did the arrow come out pretty quickly, or was it was stuck in the animal, or how'd that work out? How'd the blood trail look and everything?
When he spun to run off, he broke the arrow off on a tree. So I think the broadhead stayed in the shoulder.
Yeah.
But the arrow came out, and I could tell there wasn't a lot of penetration. I mean, I called a buddy and had him come out and help me search for blood. I mean, we even went back to the spot the next morning and looked. But I have no doubt that elk still, unless another hunter got him that season, he's still walking the earth fine. They're tough animals.
There was actually a story on the Meat Eater podcast a few weeks ago about an elk that got shot by a hunter, and the guy he put his broadhead and arrow set up on like a forum within that unit and said, "Hey guys, I've shot an animal. Please let me know if anyone comes across this animal with this stuck in it." And they found it. It got shot within that same week, 12 miles away from where it was, which is pretty crazy. Like, just to see the sort of distance they can travel, and I mean within a week as well. Like, that was just like get there and got done on the other side.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, for those animals, it's nothing for them to go 10 miles in a day if they want to. They're not. They have. I think, again, my limited knowledge of them, I think they have areas they like, but if something's bothering them there, they have no problems, and they're a migratory animal anyways, so they'll move.
And so I'm talking about that situation that you just talked about then, in regards to your broadhead setup and feeling kind of, I guess, rushed with the process and not having the time to go through it. If you had your time over again, what would you do differently? Like, if you were rushed for a hunt, say you had a week to prepare, what things would you be doing differently?
Making better shots. I mean, honestly, so if you only have a week to prepare, like you bought a bow and only have a week to kind of get it set up and get out there, depending on who you are and what your experience level, that depends on who you are and what your experience level is. I mean, at this point in my career now, I feel I've got my setup pretty dialed in, and I'm extremely comfortable with it. So, I mean, if I didn't pick up my bow till a week before season, I could get it to where it needs to be and go out with my current setup. But just because I just moved to Colorado and then was there for a couple months, deployed to Kosovo for a year, came home, had a very short amount of time. I didn't have a lot of free time to hit the range. I did hit the range as much as I could, at least a couple times a week, the 2 weeks leading up to it. But I would definitely try to figure out a way to get my fixed blade broadheads to fly better.
Yeah.
Because I've got a short draw length, so I only have a 26-inch draw length. So I'm definitely a believer in, if you've got a short draw length and you're shooting a heavy but slow arrow, a fixed blade cut on contact broadhead's the way to go.
Yeah.
That was actually and another reason that I kind of lacked the confidence in my setup is the pro shop in the area. The only pro shop I knew about in my area that was within a hour drive, I wasn't really confident in. They didn't really help me. I didn't really like the way they were doing business. And so I'd go in there and have them mess with my bow. And I kind of know a little bit about working on bows, but I don't know a lot.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to tell someone standing behind the counter at a bow shop that I think they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
But I thought they were doing it wrong. And I mean, I think that having confidence in your setup's a big one too.
Massive thing. Yeah, definitely.
And especially starting out, I mean, having a good pro shop to go to when you're just starting out is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's key to be able to go there and have them not only work on your bow, but tell you what they're doing to your bow and show you what they're doing to your bow and take the time to explain it to you so you know.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
yeah, I mean, there's plenty of videos, but also at the same time, if you don't have a bow press, you're limited to how much you can do to your bow.
Absolutely. And
yeah,
I mean, a bow press is expensive.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think you're 100% spot on with confidence in your gear. Like, just having that positive affirmation from yourself is ridiculous compared to if you're going out and just thinking like, oh, maybe it's going to be good enough. Like that's not a thought you should be having if you're hunting an animal.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, and so getting back to the calling of the elks, like what are you using? Like I've seen they've got the little tongue pieces that you can like that do the different calls. Then you've got the horns as well. Do you kind of have the full setup? And what are you doing? What are you aiming for while you're doing those calls?
So for calling bulls, like I said, that first season I was real timid with a bugle, and the second season I kind of at the end of that first season I saw the bugling works. So as far as the tools of the trade, I use a bugle tube, which is essentially a wiffle ball bat.
Yeah.
That's really what it is with one end cut off from it. And then the mouth reeds, the diaphragms is what they're called. And I rely on those pretty much the whole time. I cow call and bugle with them.
Yeah.
But I do have an open reed call that I'll also use for cow calling.
Okay.
But I'm pretty comfortable with those from calling turkeys. So
yeah.
Because that's what I use to call turkeys as well. So that makes it a little bit. I was already familiar with them, a lot more comfortable with them, and I think they sound a lot more realistic than some of the other bugle tubes out there that have internal reeds.
Yeah.
Those to me, they sound like a scrunchy straw, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They got that whistle.
Yeah.
You can always tell someone when they're out there with a fluty call. So.
And it's a blowout, like when you blow out, that's when it activates the whistle? Or is it a suck-in system?
It's a combination of tongue pressure and pushing the diaphragm against the top of your mouth.
Yep.
And that kind of gets you the different tones and and pitches that you need.
Yeah.
And then obviously the tube's just to amplify it and project it.
And are you don't sound like are you trying to throw it in different directions, or are you just always trying to throw it in the same direction?
It depends on what you're doing. If I'm just kind of moving around and I'm trying to locate a bull, then I mean I'll kind of point it in the direction I think a bull's in because I want him to hear it.
Yeah.
But and then if I'm actually working a bull, it depends on the situation. Sometimes I'll kind of try to scream right in his face, or sometimes I'll point it in the opposite direction that I think the bull's coming at me from, so he thinks I'm moving away or what have you. It's all real situation dependent.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. No, that's interesting. And then how about with when you're doing the hind calls as such, are you trying to do them like, are you trying to make multiple sounds, or are you trying to make just the one sound over and over again?
I mean, it's one vocalization, but they have different. I mean, it's pretty much it's called a mew.
Yeah.
They do chirps and mews, but it's basically one vocalization, but they just do it in different ways to mean different things. So
Okay.
there's kind of an excited one. There's a less excited one. They've got a bunch of crazy names for them, but I don't think they're actual scientific names for the different vocalizations, just mews. But you're trying to kind of sound like at least one or two cows.
Yeah.
And give the impression that. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, can you fuck up a whole situation from the calls that you're doing?
I think you can. I think you can definitely kind of turn a bull off from the calls that you're doing. I don't want to say that you can fuck it up by not sounding the best, because I know I don't sound the best. So you don't have to win calling competitions to be able to call them, but you can definitely screw it up by kind of making the wrong call at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Cows do one vocalization they do is an alarm bark. So if you hear an alarm bark from a cow, that'll shut a bull up and he'll stop.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds very similar to the red deer. Like they'll bark at you if they've seen you. They'll bark. The hinds will bark just to get rid of. Or it's kind of like an alert for everyone.
Yep,
in
absolutely.
the herd, and then it's like everyone's on all. Yeah, definitely.
And I think their vocalizations are pretty similar. They just sound different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, what else would you put around the elk hunting side of things? I mean, I'm very interested in elk hunting. I think if anything, like in regards to traveling for hunting, it's not something that, because I'm so new into it, it's not something that's majorly on my system or on my in my alert system. But for me, like an elk and the size of them just seems absolutely ridiculous and would be probably the coolest thing to go and hunt if I was to go abroad. But what things, I guess, what else could you give in regards to like first time hunters maybe going after elk?
Time. I mean, if I had to give advice to a guy going out there or going out west to hunt elk for the first time, I'd say time.
Yeah.
I mean, it took me 2 weeks, and I killed my bull the last hour of the last day of those 2 weeks that I could stay out. And I mean, and time's a big one. And then, I mean, it really depends on what you're going for. I mean, if like, take you for instance, if you're just coming to the States and you want to hunt an elk, it's a once in a lifetime thing for you. You're not trying to make it a regular thing. You just kind of want to notch your belt. I would pay for a guide or an outfitter, but because for me, I've become addicted to it. I'm trying to get out there as much as I can and by whatever means possible. So it's a lot easier. It's a lot more cost effective for me to go out and buy an over the counter tag and kind of hunt on my own. I might not be killing monsters, but at least I'm out there gaining the experience for when I do get the opportunity to hunt some of those better units.
Yeah. And what sort of pricing could you, like, for instance, just for over the counter, compared to a regular elk tag, what sort of pricing are you looking at, like as a price range from and to?
So for a non-residents pay, I think for Colorado this year, it's going to be $677, close to about $750 or $800 all said and done.
Yep.
When you pay the fees and you have to buy a small game license and a few other things, but and the price doesn't change for the units you draw. So if I had the points and I put in for a more prestigious unit or a trophy unit and I drew it, I would still pay the same price. The big change in price is between if you're a resident of the state or you're a non-resident. I mean, residents, I think they only pay $59 for the tag.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, they pay taxes. They live in the state. They're boosting the economy. So, I mean, I think they kind of deserve it. They have to deal with all of us coming in there. But then if the real price difference aside from that is when you go from do it yourself to paying for a guide and an outfitter. And that, I mean, that can get expensive.
Yeah, definitely. Real expensive.
I mean, I've seen some online that are like $10,000 and I'm like, oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's a down payment on a vehicle.
Oh, exactly, man. I mean, like, it's pretty crazy to see the money that gets dropped into it. And I think, I don't know, each their own, right? That's all you can
Yeah,
leave it at.
absolutely. I mean, and then again, I mean, if you can afford to do it, I mean, why not?
Why not?
Especially
Yeah.
if you're getting out on some pristine private land, and again, it's to each their own. The experience for me is I like the backcountry experience. I like backpacking in,
Yeah.
kind of being unsupported. You're just all your problems you have in daily life just seem to become not important when you're out there because you're focused on survival and you're focused on, your mission at hand, which is trying to locate and kill an animal.
Yeah.
So it kind of just brings the world kind of back into perspective for you a little bit out there.
Yeah, definitely. I always had a fantasy growing up. Like, I'd love to just be dropped on a deserted space. Like, have the tools to be able to gain water, and that's it. Like, you have to fend for yourself. Like, maybe have for instance, like your own knife or something, but literally it's like full survivor mode. Like, build your own hut, get your own food, like drink the water from the local lake or river or wherever you're at, and have to do that for 7 days straight and survive. And like, I mean, for someone who hasn't done any background training in regards to, like, my training would be the fact that I lived on a property for a while. So it's like, I really have no idea, no understanding of it at all. I think something like that would be absolutely unreal. And just the end of the week, like the accomplishment you'd feel, even if you weren't successful, I think if you just kind of got out and you built your own hut and you ended up kind of squatting for that week, like, yeah, I think that would be incredible.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'm a little philosophical when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I think at the end of the day, that's what our lives used to be all about, was food, water, shelter, survival. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
That's the basics of our existence.
Yeah.
But,
no, that's cool. It'd be a fun experience. And I think that backcountry hunting, like, it definitely kind of makes me think of that. And I know you're taking in stuff with you, but it's still just that similar sort of experience.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I take some things to make life a little bit more comfortable, a stove, ways to purify water. But it's still, I mean, you still get the experience out there. It's still awesome to be. And then there's no cell service out there either. I don't know what it's like over there, but once you're deep enough in the mountains, there's no cell service. So
yeah, it's the
you're
same
just
here.
disconnect.
Yeah, it depends on who you're with service-wise, but I mean, there's one company that will get access a lot of the places, but not everywhere still. And so and then there's a lot of other companies that don't get access as soon as you're out of the major cities or major towns. So it's perfect. Like,
Yeah.
I love that as a reset as well.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, everything I do is online pretty much for business. So it's like, it's perfect to get away. It's like you've got no excuse but to put it all down and put it away. It's like a complete reset.
You're out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
Yeah, I love it. So, I mean, you did talk about turkeys just before. Is that something that you've hunted with a bow?
Nope.
So
I've seen some guys hunt turkeys with a bow, and I know of guys who hunt turkey with bow, but for me, again, in turkey, the difference between hunting private land and public land, the animals a lot of times they're completely different animals on public land than they are on private land.
Mm-hmm.
They're a lot more relaxed. They're a little bit easier to pattern. They didn't have some guy chasing them off the field the day before.
Yeah.
So for me, when I turkey hunt, I go out with a shotgun. I think the only way I would hunt a turkey with a bow is if it gave me if there was a bow only season for turkey.
Yeah, okay. And so, I mean, you still have to get reasonably close to the shotgun though, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You still have they still have to be within bow range. I mean, 40 yards is the max with the shot shells, but that eliminates. They have such a good eyeball. And that eliminates that
20 times vision on humans, I think.
Oh yeah, they see your eye, they see a blinking eye. But that eliminates the need to draw a bow is what it does for me.
Yeah.
Which, a lot of times that's something that's made or broke me on deer hunts and other hunts, is having to get that bow back. That elk hunt, that first elk encounter. So
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, they're just a different creature. I'm a firm believer thus far that at least public land turkeys. I haven't had the opportunity to hunt them on private land, but public land birds are meant to be hunt with a shotgun, not a bow.
Yeah, fair enough. And so, is it same sort of, I guess, game plan when it comes to hunting turkeys? You're just calling them in, trying to locate where they are, calling them in rather than going out after them.
Yeah, I mean, you're going out after them. I mean, to locate them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's crazy how similar it is to elk hunting and that's what I kind of took away from that second year. After I got that first year of experience elk hunting, I kind of went back to the drawing board and looked at it. I was like, all right, well, in turkey hunting, to locate a bird, you use an owl call or a crow call, and it gets them. For some reason, they don't like hearing other birds like that or loud birds. It's called a shock gobble, and that'll get them to gobble while they're still on the roost.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll go out and walk right before the sun comes up, and I'll hit my owl call, and it'll get them to gobble if they're in the tree. They'll generally gobble at it.
Mm-hmm.
So boom, you locate the bird now, and you don't see it because it's still dark, but you kind of try to get close, set up, wait for the bird to fly down, and then you try to call it to you. So you kind of set up, and then you use the hen calls to call him into you. So
and you once again using that mouthpiece, like the diaphragm.
Yeah.
To call
Yep.
them
The
in.
diaphragm.
Yeah.
There's some different calls that are easier to use, but I bought diaphragms to turkey hunt with and kind of took to them pretty easily. So that's just what I've always stuck with because it eliminates the need for more movement because if you're using a hand call, then obviously you're moving your hands as well.
Yeah, I've heard of like them gobbling to some pretty crazy noises. Like,
oh yeah,
some of the stuff, and it's funny. I'll relate back to the Meat Eater podcast again because they talk about it on there quite a bit of like a train driver, for instance, and he blew his horn, and you can see him off in the wild, like off in the distance, like put their heads up and back down. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. One of my most memorable turkey hunts. That turkey was a thunderstorm had come in, so we roosted him the night before. So we call it putting the bird to bed. Mm-hmm. So we put him to bed because once they fly in a tree, they're generally there for the night. Okay. So we put the bird to bed. We were using an owl call to kind of locate them. It's basically what we call putting them to bed. We figure out what tree they flew into, and then we come back for them the next morning. We go back for them the next morning. We get within 100 yards. We set out some hen decoys, and we start calling. And this bird he flew down and did not want to come into it. He just didn't want to read the script. So he ended up going up on an opposite hill and moving away from us. Well, a thunderstorm had rolled in, and this bird was kind of standing. The turkeys, they don't like to get their feathers dirty. So when it's raining, they'll actually stand kind of in the open.
Yeah.
I think it's for two reasons. One, they don't want to really get their feathers dirty. And two, they can use their eyes to see predators because they can't hear.
Yeah, okay.
But so he's kind of standing in this open patch in a bunch of scrub oak, and every time the thunder claps, he's just going off at it. He's gobbling 2 times in a row at it every time. So it was easy for me to kind of sneak up on him while he was doing that and get the drop on him. But so they gobble some crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's insane. What sort of angle do they have on their eye? Like, if you're creeping up behind them, are they going to see you? What's their peripheries like?
I don't really know what their periphery's like, to be honest, but I mean, they're birds, so their eyes are on the sides of their head. So I want to say they at least have 180. Yeah. And then with that, I mean, those guys, their heads are constantly twitching left and right. So if they see you moving, if you move and they're looking even slightly in your direction, they've got you pinned.
Yeah, far out.
And then they see color really well too. So that's a big one. You don't like turkey hunting. You definitely don't want any bright colors. I know a lot of guys that do bow hunt them. They do all the bright fletching colors. They'll kind of hang their hunting mask or a face mask over it. Kind of one of those mesh ones to break it up a little bit. So they're not seeing those bright red and yellow and orange fletchings on their arrows.
So like in public land, do you have to wear orange over there or anything? Like, do you have to?
So for turkey hunting, no, because if you had to wear orange, I don't think anyone would kill turkeys.
Yeah, well, that was my thought. I'm like, how does that work?
But the usually what they do to mitigate that is they don't let you do any other type of hunting. So, for instance, Fort Benning, where public land, they'll generally shut down all the other hunting. But like Fort Benning, you can't hunt pigs. The only time you can't hunt pigs is during turkey season.
Okay.
So,
And how long does that last, turkey season?
I think it actually just started down there, and it'll go till May. So each state's different with their seasons.
Yeah.
Kentucky won't open till April 10th. I know I'm counting down the days. So Kentucky won't open till April 10th, and then it'll close May 5th.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the state. I mean, and each state kind of runs their own seasons based off from the weather, because the weather, I think, is a big factor in when the birds start to breed and their breeding season. So,
Yeah.
and we have such a varied climate here in the U.S., from both north to south and east to west, that each of the states kind of vary the seasons based off from that.
Yeah, okay. And so for you, where do you go hunting in Kentucky? Like, is it private land or is it?
Fort Knox, actually, they let hunters come on there and hunt. Not quite as nice of a program as Fort Benning, but it's better than nothing at all.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
So Fort Knox, and then the state also runs what's called wildlife management areas that are specifically for hunting. So they have some of those as well.
Yeah, cool. No, that's unreal. So, I mean, one thing that I probably should have asked at the start, but I mean, it's a good question either way, is your military crossover to bow hunting. Like, what are the things that you think, because of your background and training that you've gone through, have really helped your bow hunting to be more successful?
Oh, that's a loaded question. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, see, off the top of my head, because I've been to sniper school and I've been to a reconnaissance school, which both those schools play. There's a big importance on camouflage. So concealing yourself, contrasting, like not contrasting the background, stuff like that. So I think camouflage is one of the bigger skills or knowledge that I already had going into hunting. On the flip side, I think that my hunting has greatly increased kind of my stalking skills and my ability to be patient and move slowly and made me a better stalker. Snipers have to do what's called stalking. Like, guys will go out and they'll train and they'll actually try to stalk a trained observer that's sitting there with a pair of binoculars trying to find guys.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Stalking out there with camouflage. So when they do the stalking exercise, I kind of understand I had a pretty good base for the background and not camouflage in the background, how to camouflage myself. But when you're trying to stalk an animal that its whole existence is based off from avoiding a predator and being stalked, it's a lot different.
Yeah.
Humans are easy to stalk, but animals, especially deer, like I said, their whole existence is based off from not being stalked or not having a predator get the jump on them. So that, I think, they kind of help each other. Both the skills complement each other, I think.
Yeah, that's unreal. And so I guess in regards to that, like stalking in on an animal, what are your big thoughts around, like, what should you be aiming to have behind you, let alone in front of you? Like, is there things that you're kind of thinking, okay, well, if I'm standing here and the animal looks at me, it's going to see me straight out because there's nothing behind me?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the big ones that I see people mess up a lot is when they're out hunting and they might not even be stalking an animal. They're just kind of out walking and looking for an animal to stalk, is walking on the very top of the ridge. So guys will walk on the very top of the ridge or be standing on the very top of the ridge, and that immediately, to any eyeball, whether it's a human or an animal, I mean, you see that silhouette up there. They call it skylining.
Yeah.
So that one's a big one. Animals, I don't think, have as much of a ability to see color and contrast background.
Yeah.
So as long as you have something behind you and you're not wearing anything crazy, I think you'll kind of be all right. I mean, some of the earlier hunters like Fred Bear were out there killing animals with stick bows and flannel shirts and blue jeans. So
yeah, exactly. How about the thought of if an animal spots you and you're in your camo, would you stand completely still or would you move, like, slightly, like, for instance, motion like a tree leaf or something?
So the times that I've done it, it depends on what's going on. If it's windy and I'm kind of standing in brush where there's a bunch of other stuff moving around me, I'll kind of move slightly and just try to keep my movements
the same as
real small and limited to kind of the wind.
Yeah.
But if it's completely still out and an animal's busted me, I'm gonna stand still till hopefully it looks away, and then I can kind of get in a more comfortable position at least to wait it out and let it calm back down.
Yeah. Yeah. That's always been my game plan because, like, it's literally been either face-to-face with a deer or 70 meters or so when they've seen me. So it's like, stop, hold fort until they look away, and then you can kind of do your movements that you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a big one, just kind of staying calm. But it seems like every time they bust you, you're standing in the most awkward position or something where your leg's going to cramp up or...
Yeah, exactly.
Or for me, that's how it happens every single time. I mean, and they spot me and I've got like I'm doing a half split or something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even in regards to stalking, like when they're looking around and like talking from the deer that I've stalked, it's been always like they'll up and look around a little bit and then they go back to their eating. It's usually when they're eating that you should try to move and make the ground as much as possible, because obviously if they're looking up at you and you're moving, you're just going to draw attention to yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, certain animals are weird. So pigs, for example, I've noticed through bow hunting them, they don't, at least where I'm at down in where I've hunted them in Georgia, they don't have a lot of natural predators. So pigs all seem to, like, if you're stalking a big group of them or a sounder or herd, whatever you want to call it, if you're stalking up on more than one, they all generally have their head to the ground. Yeah. Versus a lot of deer species, there's always one deer with its head up, kind of pulling security. Yeah. For the rest eat.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. Actually, now that you talk about it, I've definitely noticed that when I've gone up on some pigs. So just watching them on a carcass, and they don't care. Like, until you're closer, they can really, because their vision's so bad, right? Like, they're not going to see anything if they're looking around anyway. So, yeah. It's interesting. All right, man. Well, we might wrap up there. That's been very insightful. I mean, just into looking into a little bit of what America holds, but also just in regards to your own hunting and your own kind of insights, I guess, and what you can give other bow hunters. Is there anything, like, obviously we'll give a wrap on where to find you, but is there any last things you want to talk about? Like, is there anything else you'd like to kind of drop to a beginning bow hunter, or just, I guess, bow hunters in general?
I mean, so I was listening to your Double O podcast. Again, you're talking kind of about things to consider as far as game management, kind of killing older age class animals versus killing younger animals, or proper management techniques, and then talking about continuing the sport. I think one super important thing to continue in the sport, obviously we can't be out there just murdering every animal we see, but there has to be some kind of management involved. But one big thing I see here in America that kind of turns people off from hunting is a guy will go out and kill a deer, and it might not be the biggest deer. It might be a 1-year-old, 2-year-old deer. And then someone's like, oh man, that's a cool little deer. Or they say some offhanded comment when really they should be encouraging that guy, because that might be his first deer. Yeah. I mean, I still have yet to technically kill. Well, I haven't killed a big elk by any means. I mean, they're big animals, but I haven't killed a real old, mature elk yet in my elk hunting career. And I think that if I was young in my career and kind of not as matured as I am of a hunter, I think kind of looking at social media might make me think, oh man, I'm not very good, or stuff like that. So it's definitely a slippery slope. And then I think the biggest thing was like what you're doing. I love it, because
thanks, man,
coming in fresh. So you have a fresh perspective. You know, your knowledge is limited, and you're getting all these knowledge from different people, and you're sharing it with everyone, and you're showing people that, hey, if I can go out there and do it, and I'm learning, and you're sharing your mistakes too. You're being open about mistakes. Like, that's awesome, because there's a lot of people that you see, like famous hunters, that if they make a mistake, it gets edited out of the video. Yeah. So, you know, like, name a famous hunter, like, he never makes mistakes, but we all make mistakes, especially bow hunting.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially bow hunting. So I think what you're doing is huge. I love it. It's awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. No, I really appreciate it. And I mean, it's cool just to be able to talk about it, to be honest. Like, just to be able to drop the stories is fun. But, I mean, the time that we're talking, the first podcast just got released Friday last week, and we're now on Wednesday. And the amount of outreach I've had from people is insane, dude. Like, it's overwhelming how many people are listening in and getting a lot out of the content just from the first episode, let alone, the episodes to come. I've got some awesome content coming. So I'm excited to see where we're at once this one drops about like 7 or 8 weeks deep. It's going to be really interesting to kind of see where the podcast is going in that stage already, because, I mean, we're about to come into the big deer season here in Australia, like the rut season for the reds in particular. And I mean, it's exciting times, but also for a first-time bow hunter, first time seeing the rut, first time experiencing that, like I'm absolutely over the moon just to get in and try. Like, what I'd love to do is do another podcast post rut just to say like, hey, this is what I went through, and give up all that stuff, because I don't know what's ethically right in regards to. I'm not going to go and say, hey, where do you hunt? Can I come hunting with you? Because I think that's not necessarily a good thing. It's like maybe you should wait to be invited for hunting. But also, I think that's about the ethics of hunting, is to not say, where are you hunting and how do I get there? But I mean, outside of that, like I'm happy to, I'm an open book, man. I'm happy to give up all of my information that I've got. Like, I've had people ask me all week, like, hey man, what do you think about this bow? Or what do you think about this broadhead? Or what do you think about these arrows? And I'm like, to be honest, guys, like I'm not the professional you should be asking, but these are some people I can put you onto that might be able to help. This is what I do. However, don't trust me, trust them.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like I said, I'm not an expert elk hunter, but I've killed a few elk, and this is what I do. But there's definitely people out there that they've got the title expert for sure. So
exactly. Michael, thanks so much, man. Where can people find you? Where can they follow along in your experiences and your journeys over the other side?
They can follow along with me in the great United States at Common Bowhunter on Instagram. That's really the only one. I have a Facebook, but it's just michael.t.herne. Facebook's kind of friends and family, and then Instagram's kind of where I'm doing anything that anyone would really be interested in.
Yeah, that's unreal, man.
So if you don't want to see a bunch of pictures of my dog, don't follow my Facebook, follow my Instagram.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, man, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, dude. It's been good chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. Till next time.
Likewise. That's it. That's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for joining us this week. If you have not already, please do hit subscribe. If you want to leave us a great little review, that would also be highly appreciated. However, follow along with our journey at becomingabowhunter.podcast on Instagram and Facebook. You can also check out our website, which is www.becomingabowhunter.com. And if you want to email me of any guests or any questions that you would like answered on the podcast, then you can get in touch with me via email at matty@becomingabowhunter.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Make sure you join us next week. Big love from us at Becoming a Bowhunter.